Imagine waking up tomorrow, and the world is gone. Not one city, not one country, but every major power you've ever known, collapsing within the span of a single lifetime. Palaces burned, kings vanished, trade routes erased, writing disappeared. History itself went silent. And for centuries afterward, survivors lived in a dark age so complete that many believed the gods had abandoned the earth. This is not legend. This happened. Around 1200 BC, the ancient world suffered one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. It is called the Bronze Age collapse. And the terrifying truth is, we still don't fully know what started it. Before the collapse, the Mediterranean was alive with power, an international system that feels uncomfortably familiar. Egypt ruled from the Nile, projecting wealth through temples, gold, and diplomacy. The Hittite Empire dominated Anatolia, commanding armies and vassal states from its capital at Hattusa. Mycenaean Greeks built palace kingdoms, fortified centers like Mycenae and Pylos, where scribes recorded taxes, rations, and inventories on clay tablets. Canaanite cities thrived along the coast, linking Africa and Asia through ports and caravans. Cyprus supplied copper, the lifeblood of bronze. Tin, rarer, more precious than you'd expect, traveled from far away, because without tin, bronze could not exist. This was not a primitive world. It was advanced, interconnected, globalized. Kings wrote letters to each other like equals. They arranged marriages across borders. They traded luxury goods, chariots, ivory, glass, textiles, spices, an ancient global supply chain. And that is what makes the collapse so chilling. Because when you build a world on interdependence, one failure can become everyone's failure. We know how connected it was because the evidence still rises from the sea. Shipwrecks from this era reveal cargoes that look like the inventory of an empire. Copper ingots stacked like treasure, jars of oil and resin, exotic materials sourced from distant lands. That means ships were moving constantly, ports were alive, markets depended on foreign metals and foreign grain. Palace economies ran like machines. And then, within a few decades, the machine seized. The great capitals began to fall. Hattusa, seat of the Hittite kings, was abandoned and burned. Mycenaean palaces collapsed one after another, leaving only charred rubble and shattered tablets. Coastal cities across the Levant were attacked, razed, and sometimes never rebuilt. Trade vanished. Bronze became scarce. Chariot armies, expensive, elite, metal-hungry, became impossible to sustain. And in Greece, the very act of writing disappeared for centuries. Imagine that. A civilization so broken, it lost its ability to record memory. And here is the haunting part. We can almost watch it happen in real time, because archaeologists have found the last messages of the Bronze Age. Clay tablets still sitting in palace ruins, fired hard by the flames that destroyed the buildings. One of them is a desperate letter, a warning. It says, in essence, enemy ships have been sighted, cities are burning, send help, but no help comes. And then, silence. Not a heroic final stand, not an epic last battle, just administration collapsing into panic, a civilization dying in paperwork. At Ugarit, a thriving coastal city, the destruction is so sudden that meals were left uneaten, tools were dropped, people fled and never returned. The scribes stopped mid-sentence. It is as if the world ended on an ordinary day. And that is what makes the Bronze Age collapse so terrifying. It wasn't only kings and armies falling. It was normal life vanishing. Merchants waiting for ships that would never arrive. Farmers watching the rains fail. Children growing up among ruins where palaces once stood. An entire world system, centuries in the making, gone in a generation. No explanation carved into stone. Only ash and unanswered questions. And Egypt. Egypt was struck by something that sounded like the end of the world. Ancient inscriptions describe an enemy that arrived from the sea. Not a single army, but entire populations. Men, women, children, moving with wagons and supplies, burning cities, toppling kingdoms. leaving smoke behind. The texts call them the Sea Peoples, and wherever they went, civilization followed into ruin. Pharaoh Rameses III claimed he barely stopped them. He described a coalition of peoples who had already destroyed other lands, who had turned great cities into ash. And then he wrote the most chilling line: "No land could stand before them." But here's the mystery. Who were they? Were they Mycenaeans fleeing their own collapsing world? Were they raiders emboldened by chaos? Were they refugees driven by famine and drought, a migrating storm made human? Or were they simply the final wave of a disaster that had already begun? Because the deeper you go into the evidence, the more unsettling the picture becomes. The Sea Peoples may not have caused the collapse. They may have been what the collapse produced. So what actually broke the Bronze Age? If you want the honest answer, it wasn't one thing. It was a perfect storm, a chain reaction, a system failure. And historians keep circling the same suspects, because the ruins point in every direction at once. Climate change and drought, crop failure and famine, economic collapse, internal rebellion, earthquakes, war, mass migration. Not one cause, but many forces converging, like multiple blades striking the same weak point. Let's start with the quiet killer, drought. Evidence from climate records suggest parts of the eastern Mediterranean suffered prolonged dry periods right around the collapse. And drought doesn't just mean less rain. It means harvests failing, grain stores emptying, cities panicking, armies unpaid, refugees moving. In a world where most people lived one bad harvest away from catastrophe, a sustained drought could crack an empire without a single battle. And once food becomes scarce, everything becomes unstable. Now add economics. Bronze is not just a metal, it is a network. Copper from one place, tin from another, specialist labor, transport, security, administration. The Bronze Age was dominated by palace economies, top-down systems that controlled production and survival. When that system is healthy, it creates wealth. When it is stressed, it becomes brittle. If trade routes become unsafe, even briefly, bronze production collapses. If bronze collapses, weapons become scarce. If weapons become scarce, borders fail. If borders fail, migration and raids intensify. The world begins to eat itself. Then there are earthquakes. Some scholars suggest an earthquake storm, a sequence of major quakes damaging cities already weakened by famine and unrest. On their own, earthquakes are survivable. But earthquakes plus hunger plus rebellion plus war become an extinction event for an entire way of life. When the ground keeps shaking, repairs become constant. When repairs become constant, treasuries bleed. When treasuries bleed, loyalty fades. And in palace societies, loyalty was everything. Then comes the most human factor of all, internal collapse. Because not every city was conquered. Some were abandoned. Some show signs of civil unrest, evidence of uprisings, people turning on the palace system that fed elites while the countryside starved. In other words, the enemy may have been inside the walls. A Bronze Age king could defeat an invading army, but he could not defeat hunger. He could not defeat a broken harvest. He could not defeat the moment his own people decided the palace was no longer worth obeying. And now, finally, we return to the Sea Peoples. Because if drought, famine, and collapse forced populations to move, those migrations would not be peaceful. They would collide with borders, with ports, with armies, with other desperate populations. Raiding becomes survival. Invasion becomes a search for food. War becomes a chain reaction. The Sea Peoples may have been a coalition of groups thrown into motion by collapse, an unstoppable wave created by the system's own failure. A migration of the end. And if that's true, then the Bronze Age didn't fall. It unraveled. Here is the detail that makes this feel modern. The Bronze Age world was interconnected like glass, strong, until it cracked. When one kingdom fell, trade partners lost metals. When metals vanished, armies weakened. When armies weakened, rivals attacked. When rivals attacked, refugees moved. When refugees moved, ports burned. When ports burned, trade collapsed further. A domino effect, a feedback loop. And once the loop began, no single king, no matter how powerful, could stop it. That is why the collapse hit everyone, not because they shared an enemy, but because they shared a system. Afterward, the lights went out. Cities shrank into villages. Long-distance trade became rare. Luxury goods disappeared. Craft specialization collapsed. And in many regions, the record becomes thin, almost like the world stopped speaking. For centuries, the Bronze Age became a ghost age. The ruins remained, but the voices were gone. So what ended the Bronze Age? Was it the Sea Peoples? Yes. And no. Was it drought? Likely, but not alone. Was it earthquakes? Possibly, but not everywhere. The real answer may be the most frightening one. The Bronze Age collapsed because it became too complex to survive stress, too dependent on perfect conditions, too dependent on trade never failing, too dependent on kings always holding the chain together. Complexity creates power, but it also creates fragility. And when the stress arrives, the whole structure can shatter faster than anyone believes possible. And yet, from that darkness, something new was born. Iron, more available than tin, slowly replaced bronze. New peoples rose, new kingdoms formed, new stories began. Centuries later, Greece would return with new alphabets and new epics. The world would build again. But the Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's most haunting warnings, a reminder that civilization is not guaranteed. It is something humans must hold together, or lose. Because the deeper you go into the past, the more you realize history isn't what we know. History is what survived, and some stories are still waiting to be found. Subscribe to Immortal Kings.